Thank you everybody for coming today. We are so excited to have you join us for our third Advancing Leadership Agility webinar. I am joined today by Kate Megaw and Anu Smalley, two of our wonderful certified Scrum trainers and Cal educators who are going to be sharing a bit about unconscious bias with you today and how you can really identify it and correct it from the top down. And so I'm going to pass this over to them.
Thank you so much, Molly, and welcome everyone to this webinar. We're going to talk about unconscious bias from the top down. And your presenters today, as Molly said, I am Anu Smalley. I am a certified Scrum trainer and an enterprise coach, and I am the president of Kapala Consulting Group. And my co-presenter today is Kate Megaw.
Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. My name is Kate Megaw. I am a certified Scrum trainer and certified team coach. I'm the president of the Brain Trust Consulting Group, and I'm certified Scrum trainer and happy to be joining you here today.
Wonderful. So why this topic? Why did we figure that? Why did we want to talk about this topic? So over the last year with the pandemic, we have seen, Kate and I have seen with our clients, with our families, with our lives, how important it is to get everybody on the same page, to understand that unconscious bias exists in everyone. There is nothing wrong with that. It just is. We need people to understand what it is, and we want to share with you some unconscious biases, and we want to share the impact of being able to help people mitigate these unconscious biases on their team. So that's the reason why we chose this topic for the webinar. I love this saying, if you have a brain, you're biased. So if you're listening to us and you have a brain, you are biased. And that's why this topic is so important. So unconscious bias and leadership, what's the relationship between these two? So as humans and as leaders, we all have biases. And when these biases are not looked at, understood, and mitigated, they can negatively impact every relationship we have with team members, with people in the organization, with friends, with family. Just acknowledging that we have bias is not enough. That is step one, right? We need to say, yes, I have a bias. But then to move beyond that and create what we call it, this inclusive leadership, we need to be able to look at our workforce. Our workforce is diverse, multi-generational, multicultural, multi-regional, multi-race workforce. And we need to figure out how can we be inclusive. And inclusive leadership starts with understanding, recognizing, and mitigating these unconscious biases. So inclusive leadership, this is a great definition that as Kate and I were trying to figure out some information, we came across this definition. Inclusive leadership are leaders who are aware of their own bias and preferences, actively seek out and consider different views and perspectives to inform better decision making. So it's not enough to know that you have a bias, you have to actively seek out different viewpoints so that you can make good decisions. These inclusive leaders, they see diverse talent as a source of advantage and not as a source of work to be done. They look at this diversity as something that will drive the organization and the team to success. That's why this topic of leadership and unconscious bias, we believe, is so important.
So let's explore 6 of the signature traits of inclusive leaders. So the first trait we want to look at today is visible commitment. And by visible commitment, we mean as leaders, we articulate authentic commitment to diversity. Anu's mentioned this already. We challenge the status quo. we hold others accountable, and we make diversity and inclusion a personal priority. So we've got to have visible commitment. The second trait of an inclusive leader is one of humility. They are modest about their capabilities. They admit when they've made mistakes, and they create a space for others in their organizations to contribute to the overall success of the organization. Number three, which is where we're really going to focus for the rest of this webinar, is awareness of bias. So inclusive leaders show awareness of personal blind spots, as well as any flaws that they may notice in the system. And they work hard to make sure that there's very much an inclusive environment, and their goal is meritocracy. Number four is inclusive leaders have curiosity about others. So they have an open mindset. One of the things that we talk about in the leadership classes is this open mindset, this growth mindset. They talk about, they have a deep curiosity about others. They listen without any judgment, and they seek with empathy to understand those around them. The fifth signature trait is one of cultural intelligence. And this is that they are attentive to other cultures, and they adapt as required in order to work with multiple different cultures. And then the sixth trait we wanted to talk about for inclusive leaders is one of effective collaboration. And by this, we mean empowering others. We're paying attention to the diversity of thinking. We're paying attention to the psychological safety within our teams, and we're focusing on overall team cohesion. So those are what we consider to be 6 of the traits of inclusive leaders. So next, let's explore some of the biases that may be affecting your leadership. And it may be you don't even know what they are yet. So for the next slide, and who's getting happy with the slide? For the next slide, we're going to put you to work for a minute. What comes to mind when you look at this picture? So you have the chat window. So those of you who are doing this through Zoom, and you may be able to do it on YouTube. I don't know if you can add comments on YouTube. Molly can guide us on that. But put in chat or in YouTube, what comes to mind when you look at this picture?
Lovely messages coming back. The first one is, the world is full of colors. Another comment is youth. Face mask.
Diversity.
Colorful. Yeah.
Lots of colorful.
Lots of colorful, lots of mask creation, COVID times. Everyone has a mask. Yep.
Pandemic.
COVID.
Yeah.
I love the comment about I can't see their faces. That's a good one. People are being responsible, all colors.
Same but different.
Yeah. Safe.
Where the old people. and also mostly women, someone noticed, but not only mostly women with long hair.
I love the United Colors of Benetton.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Exactly.
I love it.
Okay. So a lot of different things that are triggered when we see images. And some of these we will be talking about with the biases as we go through the rest of the session today. But we all look at the same picture, and we're all taking different things away from the picture.
Sorry, I got stuck with I realized suddenly that I cannot read through 99 chat messages, so I need to give up on the chat window.
Yeah.
But that was absolutely brilliant. I love some of the comments in there. There was one comment that said something about they're all human.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really beautifully said.
Yeah.
All right. So you get the idea of the fact that as we see this picture, each one of us comes from our own perspective, our own point of view to come up with the comment you made in the chat window. So here's the thing. Did you know that our human unconscious mind makes 90% of our decisions without us knowing it? And our brain processes about 11 million decision points every second. That's why they say the brain is the best computer ever, right? But our brain is constantly working. But because we have this knowledge, because we have this past experience, we make shortcuts. And a bunch of us said, oh, women with long hair, because I'm a woman, I have long hair, I relate to that better. Oh, lots of colors. If you were colorblind, that would not be one of your preferences. That would not be one of your past experience to speak from. So our brain is constantly making choices. And our brain is helped by these past memories. And that's what we mean by the unconscious choices, unconscious biases. Our brain makes assumptions, and you know what they say about what happens when you assume. So we do not want to be that person. Hence, we are going to talk a little bit about these unconscious biases. So this was a long lead into what are we going to talk about today? We are going to understand what is unconscious bias. We've got a flavor of it. We're going to explore some of the most common types of unconscious biases. There are lots of out there. We're going to cover 5 of them. We're going to go a little deep in there. And then we are going to identify some ways that we can try to mitigate unconscious bias. So that's our plan for the next, 40 minutes or so. Yeah. So what is unconscious bias? Let's talk about a little bit about, I'm going to spend a minute on this. Unconscious biases are also known as implicit bias. This is underlying attitudes, stereotypes that we unconsciously attribute to other people or groups of people, because that's what we know of, right? That is how we understand the world. Our past experiences make sense of the world for us. That's what an unconscious bias is all about. This is the underlying attitudes and stereotypes. How do you collect unconscious biases? Because you breathe, because you have a brain, you collect unconscious biases. Every experience in your life adds to something. And we're going to talk through some of this so that it makes more sense about what is unconscious bias by looking at some of the most common unconscious biases that exist there.
So these are the 10 most common types of unconscious bias. Everything from confirmation, affinity, stereotype, authority, and blind spot. And those are the 5 that we've chosen to focus on today. But we also need to remember there are things like normative bias, halo effect, pessimism, optimism bias, and also attribution bias, and many, many more out there. But we're going to focus on the 5. So the 5 we're going to cover today, and I'm going to cover these briefly, and then Molly's going to do a poll for us, and then we're going to do a deep dive into each of them. So the 5 we're going to look at today are, first of all, confirmation bias. And as I'm reading through these, I'm going to ask you to think, which of these unconscious biases do you feel you exhibit most? So I'm going to talk about the 5 at a high level. And then when I finish this slide, I'm going to get Molly to launch the poll so that we can see which of these 5 you feel you exhibit most, or more than the others. So the first one we're going to look at is confirmation bias. So we see the world as we are. So as Anu said, we saw long hair in the picture, so that was confirmation bias. It also crosses the line. It's also affinity bias because it's like me. Stereotype bias, it's based on one person. We assign the group of people the same trait. So we've also got authority bias, which is more often influenced by the opinions of authority figures. And then we have the blind spot bias. That is, we don't have any biases. We think we don't have any biases. So those are the 5 different ones we're going to cover today. And I'm going to ask Molly now to launch the poll. But of these 5, which one do you feel you exhibit the most? So you should be able to click on the poll question, and then it should tabulate the results for us.
Which one do you resonate with most, Kate?
I think probably the blind spot. I mean,
Yeah.
I think until a couple of years ago, I would have thought, oh, I don't have any bias.
Yeah.
But over the last 2 years, unfortunately, it's become incredibly apparent that I have a lot of unconscious biases,
Yeah.
which is a great opportunity for growth. But I like some of the steps that we've done to try and mitigate some of that. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on.
Yeah. All right, let's see. I'm not sure where. So we are going to go into the details on these biases. This is just high level view. We're going to dig into each one of these. So hopefully by the time we get through it, you will know the difference between these biases. So I'm not sure how polls close. Molly, we're going to look to you to help us with that.
We've got a few more votes coming in. We're about 400 out of 500 people here. I'll close it in about 10 seconds.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, as I've grown through these biases. When we get to authority bias, I'll share. I think that's where where I stayed a long time, and then came through stereotype bias. And I agree. For now, we will. I am with you. I'm more on the blind spot bias. So here comes the poll.
Yeah.
Most
so it looks like
confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And then we have blind spot bias. Yep. The authority bias, then affinity bias, and the stereotype bias. Yeah. So I love the comment here. Sandra, not like Sally Field, slightly different from Sally Field. So Sally Field had the famous line, "They like me, they really like me."
Thanks for clarifying, because some of us were completely oblivious as to what that reference was.
So yeah, I can tell you the story later, Kate. So
perfect.
Let's start looking into the deeper. Let's get into the top 5 that we talked about. So the first one we're going to cover is confirmation bias. The confirmation bias, we see the world as we are. So the confirmation bias describes our tendency to notice, focus on, give more attention to things that fit in with our current beliefs. And I believe in this, so I'm noticing things. A very common example of this is if you buy a blue BMW, you're going to start seeing a lot of blue BMWs on the roads. They always existed, but now this is part of your belief or part of your world. You're going to notice more. This particular bias is a cognitive shortcut that we use when gathering and interpreting information. Evaluating every piece of evidence takes a lot of time and energy. So our brain says, "Oh, I know this, so I'm going to connect with this faster," so that we make a connection. One of the examples that I often like to talk about confirmation bias is, who do you follow on social media? You follow the people who share your viewpoints. Most of us do. We don't listen to the people on opposing ideas. We don't like to do that. There are people usually think of the example of people on two sides of the issue. They hear the exact same story, but they walk away with different interpretations, the things that they feel validate their point of view. This is what confirmation bias is. All right. So we're going to show you a quick poll. We may or may not ask you to put it in the chat window because we are not trying to open up a political debate. But think about this. Where do you get your news? Fox News? Then what are you thinking? What's your interpretation of what's happening in the world? Do you watch CNN? What is your interpretation of what's happening in the world? Whichever version you watch doesn't make you wrong, doesn't make you less, just makes you the fact that you have an unconscious bias that confirms your beliefs. And your beliefs are valid and they're good. So that's your confirmation bias. That's the first bias that we're going to talk about. Right? All right.
So lots of people watching different news channels, so we should have expanded it beyond
NPR, BBC.
Yeah.
I know, hot topic. That's why we. So here's the thing: you watch fill in the blank news channel. What confirmation bias do you have in there, right? Mm-hmm. And that will tell you what is it that you believe in, what do you value. What did you grow up with? What are your past experiences? And that's all that matters. It doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it valid for you, right? Exactly. All of the above. Enjoy your various views, enjoy your justifications. And for those who watch the Cartoon Network, yes, awesome.
Excellent.
All right.
So the second bias we wanted to look at, if I can get Anu to go back one slide, is the affinity bias. So this is different from the confirmation bias because this one is it's impacting the decisions that we make in the business context along the lines of it's the like me bias. We are favoring people who are like us. So research shows us that there are different levels of unconscious affinity bias, but they fall into three key areas. One area is work allocation. So as a manager, you are much more likely to allocate any work that is going to stretch people to people like you as a manager or as a leader. The second level is feedback. So as a manager, you're often more likely to provide critical feedback to those who are most like you and less so to those who are in another group. The third way we see these appearing in the work environment is informal mentoring and sponsorship. Again, as leaders and managers, we're more likely to offer informal support to those who are in our existing social networks. So affinity bias, the like me bias, is coming through our work environments in work allocation, in the feedback we give to individuals, and in any informal mentoring or sponsorship where we're tending to do it to people within our existing networks.
And I'll add something that's a non-work related, if that may help. So if you have a large group of friends, but there are some friends you connect with more because they're more like you and they like the things you do. And I have my science fiction friends because they like the stuff I like. So I affinitize with them more. It's not just work, but in life as well. The examples go all over, right?
Yeah, and there was a question around what do we mean by social networks? So it's everything that Anu was talking about. It's maybe a group you connect with outside work. Maybe it's your wine tasting group. Maybe it's your church, maybe it's another group you're a member of. In a work environment, maybe it's people in your team, or it's people maybe in your LinkedIn group and things like that. You are more likely to give advice and support to people that are somewhere in that social network.
Exactly. And yes, it is, we want to work with people who are like us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's easier, and you recognize yourself in them. So that's affinity bias. And I think there were some questions about difference between confirmation bias and affinity bias. So hopefully that's come through. Confirmation bias is basically talking about things that associate, that you connect with or based on your values and your beliefs. Affinity bias is people who are more like me. So if, like we said, when you looked at the picture, most of us said, oh, long hair. That's an affinity bias. I connected with people, with the women with the longer hair, and so on. So those are the first two biases. The third bias we're going to dig into is stereotype bias. This is, there's something about a single person, and based on that single person, we assign the group of people the same trait, the same attributes, the same characteristic. So the most common thing we hear in IT, in Agile transformations, IT organizations is, well, IT never delivers. Well, your last few IT teams may have had a struggle. So IT in general does not deliver. That's a stereotype bias. That's very work related, very typical. So if you have, and vice versa, let's look at the opposite side of it, where the IT group is saying, well, every business department I've ever worked with just don't get Agile and IT. The business never understands us. They just do their own stuff. So all businesses all over the world are wrong, bad, never understand. There is a huge stereotype in the social networks around gender, race, color, language, background, religion. Think about what's happening in the world today. It's all around that. And I can tell you, as a woman of color, I've experienced my share of stereotype biases in the world. And I have had my own shares of having unconscious bias towards people who maybe look like me, because I maybe feel safer. So that's my stereotype bias coming in. Kate had a great example around stereotype biases. Kate, you want to jump in with that?
Yeah, and as I'm thinking about this now, I'm wondering whether it was maybe even more of the affinity bias, but it would come in both. And that was hiring someone because they've worked at the company you previously worked at. Mm-hmm. Maybe they did a similar role to you, so they must be good because they understand. And if you're a good fit for this organization, then maybe they're a good fit as well. Mm-hmm. So I think when I've done that once, I've done that. It was, I think, probably affinity and stereotype together.
Yeah. And I love what somebody is saying in the chat window, that everybody has a stereotype bias to a certain degree. Absolutely. Yeah. And yes, there should be a methodology or framework bias. We should make one up for that, right?
And I like this one, sort of hiring someone who came from a particular university.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That can be both a stereotype and an affinity bias that goes into play there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's number 3. We're going to move to number 4.
And number 4 is authority bias. And this is one that the boss, we anticipate that our boss or our senior leaders are always going to make better decisions because they're more senior. So maybe we don't challenge them. We trust them and we're influenced by the decisions that authority figures make, whether it's our parents, whether it's our boss at work, whether it's the leader of a social group we're a member of outside. So that is one way that authority bias is important. And I think, Anu, you had an example here as well.
Yeah, so for me, it's, I am my origins are Indian. I was born in India, and India is very authoritarian in the family, especially being a woman in the family. So it was always whatever decisions were made by the people who are elders must be followed because they are elders. And I've come to realize that, yes, I have an authority bias to my family, to my teachers, to my bosses when I had bosses in India. And similarly, when I have team members in India, they have an authority bias towards me because they just assume I'm going to make the right decisions. And I'm going, dear God, that's not a burden I want to bear for an entire team or organization, right? And then I think one of the things we had talked about was one of the authority biases is, imagine if your leader asked you to get something done by a certain date and you don't agree that that is the right time box for it, but you still push it onto your team. That's an authority bias.
And Anu, I think it's an interesting questions come up in chat. Do you consider all biases negative?
Nope, not at all. There are, every bias that we've talked about has the good and the bad. Nothing is always bad. Nothing is always good. It just is. Our job is to recognize that it is, and what we do with it is maybe what is negative or positive. I may have a stereotype bias, for example. I'm going to go back to that and say, maybe if I'm in a hiring position and I choose to hire only women of color, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But that's my bias showing in. If I now ignore a good candidate, now I'm becoming negative. But if I'm focused on increasing diversity, that's positive. So it's how you use your bias, recognize, and what do you do with it that makes it good or bad. Lots of messages about military. Yep.
Yeah.
Belief in science or leaders of science. That is an authority bias. These are people who know more. So we believe they will make the good decision that we cannot because we don't know enough.
Yeah. So let's look at number 5 then, because I think this is where we're going to spend some time as leaders today.
Yeah. And this starts with the whole thing was, I'm not biased. By the
was
fact
that the second most popular one on the poll we did?
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm saying the minute people say, I'm not biased, that means you for sure are biased, right? Here's an example. And I've done this so many times. There is an assessment that Kate and I took, which is called our Saboteur Assessments. And we use that in our Cal 2 program. So we both took the Saboteur Assessment. We didn't like the Saboteur Assessment that came back, we chose to tell each other we should take it again just to confirm it. But let's be honest, I didn't like what my saboteur showed up. So I took it again because I don't have those saboteurs. I'm awesome. I'm great. Think about, like, I remember my husband did this once. He took an IQ test somewhere with one organization, and it showed him to not be where he assumed he was going to be. And he said, that's all wrong. I'm going to go find a different assessment. And that assessment gave him the right number. And he said, yep, that's the right IQ test. That's a blind spot, believing that I have no biases and we only see biases in others because we don't have any biases, right? So that, and this is the bias we are going to focus on for a little bit from now. So let's see. Kate's going to take, no, I'm going to take this one. So here are the top 6 blind spot biases, and this is fun for us. The first one was being afraid to ask for help. As a leader, This is one of the things I've learned in my career as a leader. If you don't know, don't be afraid to ask for help. So going it alone, I'm a leader, so I must know every answer. That's a bias. That's a blind spot bias that I need to know. Being insensitive of the impact of your behavior on others, being unaware of how you show up. So you show up and you say something and everybody in the room is going, seriously? And you're going, what? Blind spot bias. I know everything and my opinion is the right thing because that is the only thing that exists. I'm sure you know people who think that way. See what I just did? That's my blind spot bias. I assume you know people and I don't. Blind spot bias. Treating commitments casually. This is something that I know Kate and I talked about a bit. And this is where when you're looking at people who don't show up to meetings on time, who don't do the work they've committed to do, they treat commitments casually. It's not required. But when it comes time for others to do the same for them, they want them to be committed 100%. So that's a blind spot bias. I always show up on time to meetings. Oh, do ya? Not taking a stand, being completely wishy-washy. And you see a lot of this blind spot in newer leaders. I don't know what I don't know. I'm going to just sit on the fence till somebody pushes me over. And then finally, tolerating good enough. I know as a leader, as a trainer, as a coach, this is something that Kate and I have discussed, that this is like, how can you be okay with this? How can you look at some work that's being done and not see that it is not up to standards? So this could be a peer leader who may be talking about, oh, my team is brilliant. And you're going, really? No, their work is not up to par. That's an unconscious bias, a blind spot that they have. So these are the most common blind spot biases.
And we're going to have a poll now. We're going to get Molly to launch a poll again. But the poll this time is, which one of these blind spots resonates with you most? So think about either yourself or think about others in your organization. Which one of these 6 resonates with you most? So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes.
And I'm just reading through notes here on the chat window.
Okay.
Seeing what we have here. I think we're getting a couple of questions as well.
Yeah, there's several questions around the recording, and Molly's responded saying that the
Okay.
webinar recording will be available in the resource library shortly after it ends. So the recording will be there and the slides and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And James put the the assessment for the saboteurs. That link's in there as well. People are looking for that.
Yep. Number 3,
okay.
Frustrating.
Yeah. Okay, and then Molly, if we can close that out, we've got most of the results in, and let's see where we recognize most of ourselves.
Asking for help.
Yeah. And that, as Anu said, is one of the hardest things. And that is often when we're coaching organizations, we talk about setting up communities of practice. And it's something that we do, yes, at the team level, but it's a lot of times what we suggest that teams do at a leadership level, especially if your team works together, maybe they've done some training together. we're going to ask that they stay together and they continue to meet and help each other grow. We'll talk a bit later on in this session about something called accountability partners. And that is one of the key ways to get support for that.
All right, so let's get into what do we do with these blind spots? How do we get ourselves more knowledgeable and more understanding of this? So here you go.
So this is the section on uncovering your blind spots. And we changed that word from identifying to uncovering to what are your blind spots. We changed that word so many times. So what are the top 5 things you can do to uncover your blind spots? The first thing you can do is solicit feedback in the right way. So if you say to your colleague, so what are my blind spots? That is more difficult to answer than if you say, what is one blind spot you think I have and should be aware of? So the people to ask are people you work with, people who work with closely, and maybe it's your partners or your kids or your parents. It's soliciting feedback in the right way, asking for one piece of feedback at a time. So that's number 1, soliciting feedback in the right way. And also, although it doesn't say it here, from the right person. Number 2 is surrounding yourself with diverse thinkers. The goal here is that you will continue to learn from them. We talked about a growth mindset. You will continue to grow and learn from them. We talked earlier on about communities of practice. So your communities of practice or communities of learning should have people from a variety of perspectives, different experiences, and different approaches to problem solving. So the third one is examine your past to identify patterns. So if you think back to how have you succeeded as a leader, or how have you struggled as a leader? So what situations have led to desirable outcomes or maybe less than undesirable outcomes? What feedback have you received from mentors or from coaches or from generic advisors? So the third thing to uncover your blind spot is examine the past in order to be able to grow and move forward. The fourth one is around identifying triggers. And although we would like to pretend we don't, we all have triggers. And it may be a variety of situations that lead us to act impulsively or instinctively without even thinking about what we're doing. So it could be people, it could be events, or it could be circumstances. Anything will have the power to shape how we react. So in order to uncover our blind spots and identify our triggers, we've got to learn to master our triggers. If we can master our responses, we can make our responses work for us rather than working against us. And then the final one, and I think this is the most useful one of them all, is seek out a blind spot buddy. In case you've not noticed, Anu and I are blind spot buddies. And in case you haven't put together the whole color scheme, our favorite colors are green and purple, which you wouldn't think go together, but everything we do as Team Katanu is green and purple. So find someone who is going to call you out on your blind spots. Find someone that will be completely open and honest with you and that will hold you accountable to make the changes you need to make. And then remember, the flip side of every blind spot is a strength and it's an opportunity for growth. So back to the conversation, are blind spots always bad? No. If you're aware of them, you learn from them and you grow from them.
Right. And I can add to that saying, having an accountability partner or a blind spot buddy, however you want to call it, is actually critical because leadership is a team sport. You cannot do this by yourself. You've got to work with somebody so that they can hold up the mirror for you, because it's hard to look deep inside yourself, and it's easier to hear it from somebody who you trust, who you have that relationship with. So these are great ways that you can work on yourself. One of the tools we use in our leadership program is, I think somebody mentioned the chat window, is the Johari window. This is one of my favorite tools that I've been using as I coach people. So the Johari window is a technique that helps people better understand their relationship with themselves and their relationships with others. This is created by two psychologists, Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingham. They created this in 1955, and it is still so relevant. And I've used this with individuals, with groups, in organizations, but it is a good activity to understand the importance of focusing on self-awareness. Right? So the Johari window, the way it works is it's like a window pane. So what I'm going to ask you to do, for those of you who can see my video, take a blank piece of paper and fold it into 4. So you have 4 panes, right? So you have four panes in here. That becomes your Johari window. So this is what you can do for yourself as we go through it, or you can do it later. So the Johari window, the top left is the area of yourself that is known to you and known to others. So I'm going to actually go to the next slide because that's a better view. So imagine the window as a window to yourself, knowing you. And at present, your window looks like 4 equal panes, right? Open, blind spot, facade, and insights. The open area is the part of ourself, our own attitudes, beliefs that we are aware of, and which everybody else is aware of as well. We move around in this area with complete freedom. We're open books. It's all good. So for me, for Kate and I, we walk through the 4 areas of the Johari window. And for me, it's about what I say is what I do. I am black and white. My integrity, my word means something. Integrity is key. For Kate, if you ever met Kate, if you know her anything, a bit, she is a servant leader to her roots. And that's an open book. Everybody knows about it. If she's a scrum master, a coach on your team, she is the mama bear. So don't F with her team. That's the thing with Kate. Open book. Everybody knows about it. The facade, or the hidden area, is the area that is known to me, but not known to others. So this is that area where we hide from others. We're not comfortable sharing this with everyone else. Kate and I have a secret to share with you that we will share now because not many people will know. We are certified Scrum trainers and coaches, and we show up and we talk at conferences. We all put together, but you leave the 2 of us together. We've been known to hang out in hotels when we are training together in the evenings, complete slobs. We stay in the room, we don't leave, we sit in our pajamas, we watch reruns of NCIS. We are not always go, 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 right? You leave us alone, that's the other side of us that we don't normally shout out from the top of the roofs, right? So that's the facade. That's the thing we watch. And for all of the diehard Gibbs fans, hoo-yah. So then you have
That's right. Everyone's coming out of the woodwork now. Me too.
Exactly. Gibbs rules, absolutely. Then you have your blind spot. These are things that we don't know, but others know. So this is where your accountability partner shows up, right? And Kate always tells me over and over again that I do not understand the power of my voice and what good it can bring to teams, organizations, and to the world. And I keep telling her, you don't step into your power often enough, and you're not reaching your full potential. So these are things that are hidden from us, but known to others. And the final one is the insights, the unknowns. I don't know this about me, others don't know about me. So we do work on ourselves to gain insights, to learn more about ourselves. So what do we do with the Johari window? The window might look like this, 4 equal parts of the pane. Our goal as humans is to make it look like that. Minimize the facades, minimize the insides, make the blind spots as small as possible so that the open part of the pane is the biggest part of you. That is open book to everyone. This is where your authentic self shines. You are who you are all the time. So this is what we use in our leadership program as well to help leaders understand how do you grow yourself? How do you recognize yourself?
So Anu, I think it might be useful if we go back to the Johari window pane. So this one, and then I would like to invite everyone to grab their piece of paper. And if you've not written anything down as Anu went through this, take a minute and jot down something that might be known, something in the open field. It's known to yourself and it's known to others. Something in the hidden pane, it's known to yourself, but is not known to others. And then something in your blind pane, something that is not known to yourself, but it's known to others. And you may not be able to fill that one in now. That is maybe your homework when you finish this webinar, is go and ask someone, what would you consider is my blind spot? And then the unknown, we're probably not going to have anything there because we don't know what we don't know.
And that's where, as somebody said, coaching is great, because if you work with a coach, that's when you get, oh, I do that, don't I? Oh my God. And then that moves into a blind spot or a hidden spot. And then you move it up into the open pane.
So if we bring all of this together, we have a question for you. And I'm going to get you to put it in Zoom chat. And we're also going to encourage you, when Molly posts this in the on the various different LinkedIn channels and things like that afterwards, I'm going to encourage you to continue the conversation there. Mm-hmm. But based on everything that we've covered, we've talked about inclusive leadership, we've talked about the different types of bias, we've concentrated on the blind spot bias, we've talked about the Johari window. How can leaders encourage a diverse workforce and address their unconscious biases? So how can you as leaders encourage a diverse workforce and address any of your unconscious biases? So take a minute and put down in the chat window anything that springs to mind now.
Yeah. Self-management and feedback, that's awesome.
Yeah, being aware of your biases is another great one.
Sort of transparency.
Yeah, seeking anonymous feedback. Mm-hmm. Open communication.
Self-awareness.
Listening.
Psychological safety.
Treating people as individuals. Openly challenging biased decision-making.
Remove names from resumes. Great idea.
Actively sponsor someone who is different from you. So a lot of really good ideas. And I'm going to ask that you continue to come up with ideas. And when you do see the link from Molly, add any other ideas to that. So lots of ideas to focus on how we as leaders can continue to get better and better.
Wow.
So
this is great.
I know.
Molly, we're going to be able to save the chat, right?
That's where I was going next. Molly, can we save this chat?
Yes, you can. I will.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome.
So, and Molly, if you can get that to us, we can add it to a slide. So it's all in one slide for everyone when we PDF it after this.
Perfect. And
okay.
We have a few minutes. We have a couple of the questions in our Q&A that I was just going to throw out to you guys. I think you covered this a little bit when you were talking about the biases, but someone asked, what are the positive values of biases and what are the examples of that?
What are the positive values? Is that what you said?
What's the positive side of having biases? Is there any situations or examples where biases are actually helpful and not harmful?
I think for me, while it may appear harmful, it is the growth that happens from it that is the positive side to it. So if we understand what our biases are with the big if, and if we are willing to change, it becomes, we can turn it into a strength from there.
And also think about, if you're looking at all the positive bias values, can also be, if you understand your bias and you understand other people's unconscious bias, it might help you connect more, build more psychological safety in there as well. So it's like I said earlier, unconscious biases are not good or bad.
Yeah.
What you do with them is what could be called good or bad.
And someone put in the chat, authority bias, for example, a doctor. This could be a positive one. We want to defer to our doctor and do as we're told.
Yeah.
Okay, Molly, did you have another question?
Yes. Does distrust of authority fall under the same category as authority bias, or is that considered different?
Distrust of authority. So distrust of authority is slightly different. Authority bias says, my doctor, I have a doctor, they're a doctor, they're a leader of science, I will trust everything they say because whatever they say must be good or must be right. If I have distrust in my doctor, I would be doing the complete opposite. I'd be saying, what the heck does my doctor know? I'm not going to listen to them. So there is a difference between distrust of authority and authority bias. Actually, it's probably an opposing view there. Authority bias is, it doesn't matter because they are in authority, I will believe what they say.
Right. And then this has come up a couple times. People are just wondering if you would be willing to add some information about the 5 biases you didn't cover in the slides. So
yes, yeah, absolutely. Because we had them created to start with, but we knew we were going to talk for too long, so we had to cut them back.
We have the slides already.
We have the slides already, so absolutely. So as we close out today, I'm going to ask that if Anu can take us to the next slide, your ticket out today is, as a result of what we have covered today, what are you taking away to do differently? So what are you taking away to do differently as a result of what you have heard today? So if you don't mind, pop that into chat. And Molly has put in there the link to remember to claim your Scrum education unit for this event. Molly will be sharing the slides. We will add back the biases that we did not cover. We will make sure all of the links are available in one slide. And we will include the content from the last slide where we asked you for what we as leaders are going, how we're going to encourage a diverse background. So, and then the ticket out, what are you taking away to do differently?
Lots of good stuff here. And yes, I agree. This should be a 2-hour session. So speaks my bias. So speaks my bias.
Yeah.
Blind spot buddy, Johari Window.
Challenge myself, be more aware of biases.
Examine my decisions.
Yeah.
Lots of great work.
I now realize I have a blind spot bias. I love that. If nobody takes anything else away from today, it's understanding that we may have a blind spot bias.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wonderful. This is awesome.
Okay, so Anu and I will hand back to you, Molly, to close us out.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for everybody for coming today, and a huge thank you to Kate and Anu for taking some time out of their day to share this incredible presentation with us. I know I have learned a ton, and I work at Scrum Alliance where we talk about these things a lot. And so again, thank you. I will be sending the claimable SEU link out in the post-event email, as well as the slides and recording. It may take a little bit longer, so just hold on. It may take until tomorrow, but the email will come. And we also ask that you fill out a quick survey so we know how to keep improving these events. Other than that, I think I'm going to release y'all all to the rest of your day. So again, thank you for coming, and we will see you at next one.
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
For being here. Bye. Katanu out.